You're listening to Winnipeg's Classic 107. My name is Simon Rusnak. Canadian Sarah McElravy is an internationally renowned string player, a career chamber musician, recitalist, and pedagogue, equally adept on both violin and viola, who has performed as soloist with major orchestras around the world, the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic, the Warsaw Phil, the Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra, Helsinki Philharmonic, and more. She returns to home turf to close out the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra's 2023-24 season, and I'm excited to say that Sarah McElravy has joined me in the Classic 107 studio. Hello.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too. And welcome to Winnipeg. Have you been to town before?
This is my first time in Winnipeg. I'm very excited to finally make it here.
Well, you were born a province over in Ontario, right?
Yes.
In Peterborough area?
Yeah, I was born just a couple of hours north of Toronto at Lindsay. It's right next to Peterborough, so Kawartha Lakes area.
How often do you get to come back home to Canada?
Not enough. I'd say I make it back a couple times a year.
Yeah.
But I also try to I live in Vienna, Austria now, so I try to bring my family over to Vienna.
Yeah, I'm sure they're not going to say no to that.
Yeah, it's quite...
And we're going to get to Vienna in just a little bit. But I'm curious, can you tell us more about those early years in Lindsay? What do you remember about those early music moments?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, looking back on it, I'm so grateful that I grew up in Lindsay because I had so many opportunities to be on stage. There was a wonderful little theater called the Academy Theater. And I was always, it was about 800 seats, so sizable.
Yeah.
And I was doing my concertos and my sonatas, and I had so much support from the community that I don't know if I would have had that if I had have grown up in a bigger city. And I was always part of the musicals, and so it was really a musical upbringing.
I imagine you started on the violin, right?
I did, yes.
When did you, I was going to say changed the viola, but you didn't change. You sort of added it to your musical palette. When did you start playing viola?
So I started playing viola actually quite late. I was 30 when I started playing viola. Right. So that was about 9 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's funny because in the last 9 years, I would say now I play about 95% viola. So
what kind of made you add it at the age of 30? So often it comes, as I understand things, through youth orchestra. There's a whole bunch of violinists.
Of course, and they need a violist.
Of course. Necessity probably wasn't what drove this change. What prompted the shift?
I played in a string quartet for about 7 years called the Linden String Quartet. Yeah. I was the first violinist of the quartet. And I'm not sure how much you're all familiar with the string quartet sort of lifestyle and schedule, but it's really intense. We were on the road a couple hundred days a year. It's a huge, amazing repertoire, but very big repertoire to learn. And I think by the time the quartet ended, I was sort of ready to explore something new. And I really love the inner voices. Even though I was an outer voice, I was playing the first part. I love what makes a quartet great. Or in orchestra, it's always the inner voices. It's the harmonies that come from the inside. And I kind of always had this interest in the back of my mind of trying the viola. And then when I finally picked it up and started seriously, there's different types of violists. There's always this little bit of a stigma like, oh, a violinist playing the viola.
Right.
And I didn't want to be, I really wanted to take the viola seriously and work at it, like exclusively on viola. And I've done that for the last 9 years. And I have to say, I think I was always a violist.
Huh.
I really found
what does that mean? Yeah.
I think with my sound, my personality, the way I approach an instrument, I kind of really found my home on the viola. It was a shock to me, but I'm so happy. I'm just loving learning the viola repertoire. And
well, just to catch listeners up a little bit, you grew up just north of Toronto in Lindsay, as we were just saying. You went on to study at the Cleveland Institute, then Yale University. It was there you founded the Linden String Quartet. You all won top prize at the Fischoff National Chamber Competition. A big deal ensemble. You made that transition to the viola a little bit later. You're now based in Vienna, and your life really takes you around the world. I'm curious, when you think back to those early years in Lindsay, is this what you envisioned, that you'd be based in Vienna,
No.
this music mecca, traveling the world, playing viola repertoire?
Never. I'm so grateful. I'm so lucky. I think in classical music, these are the kinds of things, we can hope for it, but it's not a decision you make that you get these opportunities. And I'm just, since I came to Europe and I have access to travel to concerts in Paris and Milan and all over Asia. It's just kind of been a wild ride.
No kidding. And you're just along for it. And how could you not be?
Yeah.
Just so deserved. And we're so excited to have you here in Winnipeg for the first time to close out the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra's 2023-24 season. This their last concert. And speaking of lasts, you're going to be performing the last creation by Dmitri Shostakovich, the 1975 viola sonata that's been arranged for viola, celesta, and strings by Vladimir Mendelssohn. As is so often the case in Shostakovich's writing, there's a ton to unpack here. So I'd first like to begin by talking about the character of the viola. I mean, as you were just saying, it's dark, it's soulful, it's got this introspective sound. Yeah. And at this time, the composer's body was failing him, but his mind was sharp. He was at the height of his creative powers. Why do you think he turned to the viola for his last creation?
Well, there's an interesting story that I've heard about sort of this whole situation. So a friend of mine was dear friends with Slava Rostropovich. And Rostropovich asked this friend to please tell as many people as possible, because not many people actually know this. Slava received a call when he was living in Paris about 20 years after Shostakovich's death. And someone said, I really need to speak to you. I have something to show you. And he was a little confused, like, well, what is this? But okay, come to Paris. And when the man showed up to Paris, he handed him an envelope. And Slava opened the envelope, and what was inside were the first 2 pages of the viola sonata written in the bass clef.
Oh.
So what does this mean? Slava defected from the Soviet Union in 1974. The viola sonata was written in 1975. As a violist, it pains me a little bit to say this, but I think that originally this was actually intended to be written for Slava. They were dear friends. Yeah. It would make sense that his last work would be dedicated to Rostropovich. But that being said, Shostakovich loved the viola. And I think that when you listen to this sonata, the viola is the perfect instrument to sort of express these repressed and tragic sort of overtones of his life.
It's a really heartbreaking piece. And I mean, thanks for sharing that story. I mean, I was poking around. I hadn't found that
no one
anywhere.
knows. I always feel like I need to tell everyone because it's just such an interesting... Yeah, I
mean, it's strange to imagine it with the cello, but at the same time, like you say, the viola just feels like the perfect voice for this final farewell, this sort of looming specter of death in the composer's life. And I mean, I'm very curious because one of the things I did read is that the composer called the opening movement, for instance, a novella.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what kind of story you think he was trying to tell in that opening movement? It is a sort of devastating one.
Of course. I mean, I think, so the opening, there's this pizzicato sort of 30 seconds that I'm playing just the open strings. And for me, this is really kind of fate, sort of death knocking on the door. And in the first movement, I mean, you're kind of, there's no really tonal center. You're sort of searching, you're a little bit lost. It's, I think, setting the stage to explain his life. I think this is really an autobiographical piece about what he went through. It includes his tragedy, the sarcasm in the second movement, and then, of course, the final movement.
That final movement is just one filled with influences, but also himself. I was reading the program notes that have been prepared for this concert, and the final movement not only quotes Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, but also all 15 of Shostakovich's own symphonies.
All 15. It's amazing.
Plus Richard Strauss's Don Quixote.
Yes.
What's going on there?
Yes. Oh, it's amazing. And I didn't even realize that until I've played Don Quixote.
Yeah.
And when I read it, the final arpeggio that I play, this is the moment that Don Quixote dies.
Yeah.
Where the cello plays. And I was like, how did I miss that? It's incredible how he incorporates subtly, like he did his whole life. His whole life was a balance of being controlled by the Soviet regime, but still finding ways to sneak in his critique of this horrible life that he had to, this fine line he was always balancing on.
And it's one of those things that you always end up talking about when you talk about Shostakovich. It's
inevitable.
That line that he was walking.
Of
but
course.
Again, there's this sort of release in this last piece of his. He's able to really showcase himself in his sort of classic fashion.
Yeah, I feel in the and I was actually just speaking to a friend about this yesterday evening, but I would like to say that the end, well, first of all, the end of the final movement, I think he's no longer with us. He's already in the heavens. It's clear. He knew he was going to die, and I would like to say that it was an acceptance, but I think it was more a resignation. He resigned to the fact that unfortunately this was his life. It was quite tragic, as we know, and it's really touching when you listen to this piece. It's a very special.
A very special piece indeed, again, from 1975, a work originally for just viola and piano, and then in 1991, it was arranged by the Romanian violist Vladimir Mendelssohn. Mm-hmm. I'm sure this was a welcome addition to the violist's sparse solo repertoire.
Absolutely, absolutely. I believe that he wrote it for Yuri Bashmet.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful, wonderful recording with Gidon Kramer's Kremerata Baltica. And, sometimes it's questionable when people, especially with a piece of this importance, when you do arrangements, there's sometimes some skepticism. Mm-hmm. But this is done so, so well. It's so colorful. It's unbelievable how much he incorporates the cello and the bass. Because at the time, or generally in Russian music, I mean, if you listen to some of the old or watch some of the old Muravinsky recordings, the bass plays such an important role. Mm-hmm. They would have 15 basses lined up at the back of the orchestra, and it's this Russian sort of deep sound. And Vladimir Mendelssohn, he really sort of incorporates this idea with this heavy bass part. It's spectacular. And then with the timbre of the cellist as well, it just helps bring in this otherworldly feeling to the piece.
Is it safe to assume this is a work you've performed before?
Yes. This will be my first time with orchestra.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I was curious about.
So excited.
And you get to do it alongside the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra in your debut.
I know.
Anne Manson on the podium.
Yeah.
It's going to be a fantastic way, again, a devastating way, a heartbreaking way, but a very moving and artistic way to close out this season. What a thrill it is to have you here, Sarah, in Winnipeg for a debut, closing out the 2023-24 season. Thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And you can find more details on Sarah McElravy and the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra up on the website, classic107.com, or head to themco.ca.